Super. That is us. So thank you everybody that has got on live. We appreciate the effort, and thank you Vanessa for volunteering your time and giving some information that I think everybody can always benefit from in the realm of nutrition. So just to kind of maybe start us off, Vanessa, could you let people know your kind of background and what you do on nutrition and just your kind of beliefs on it, I suppose?
Okay, well, I suppose my background is I'm a qualified dietitian. I qualified back in 2000, and then back in 2003, I then qualified as an accredited sports dietitian and started my own sports nutrition practice way back then. I've worked in all areas of nutrition. I started off in Manchester in an acute hospital there, and then I moved over to Galvin, and then I moved into the community. And then when I got married and moved to Dungannon, I started I always had a special interest in diabetes, but I was appointed as one of the diabetes specialist dietitians within the Southern Trust. I've also done a lot of work. I was employed as an investment for health dietitian, so to go and help schools tackle the issue of childhood obesity. So I've got a big variety of knowledge in terms of nutrition, and I suppose where I come from, I actually hate the term diet. I hate good and I hate bad foods. So it's very much all foods allowed, but just getting it in the right balance. And it's trying to teach people not to be guilty about eating food. So you should never feel guilty. And I suppose that's me. The basics is just eating for health, giving the body what it needs, and enjoying the food, because food is a luxury and we should enjoy it.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic, and I know we had kind of spoke on this briefly before, where you had mentioned a couple of things that really resonated with how I felt nutrition was, and for me it made a lot of sense to kind of delve into that a bit more and get some more context on that. And there's a couple of things that you mentioned there as we make our way through this that we'll definitely touch on. And I think one of the things that they kind of maybe kick us off with is, like, in terms of nutritional principles, is there anything that you kind of abide by yourself or communicate to your clients that you work with, that if you can kind of include these things in your nutrition plan, your day-to-day nutrition, this is what you would advise?
Yeah, well, I suppose there's the backbone of everything. It's making sure that we give the body what it needs in the quantity that it needs it. So I suppose even whenever I'm even planning and preparing meals for my kids, I'm constantly thinking, right, where's their carbohydrate source, where's their protein source, and then where's their fruit, their veg or salad or something, to try and balance that meal out. And then the other thing would be making sure that we definitely have enough fluid. I think a lot of us, especially in Northern Ireland, because of our climate, we are naturally very poor at drinking enough. And a lot of people maybe aren't aware or forget that in order to digest our food appropriately or properly, we actually do need the right amount of fluid as well. Then if you do exercise, we need additional fluid. So it's making sure we just have those basics, and then I build on that. So obviously if I'm meeting with an athlete, their energy requirements are going to be, and protein requirements are going to be so much different than just the routine population. And then I suppose in the world of diabetes, it's very much working with the person to adapt their diet and lifestyle to improve their medical condition and reduce their risk of having the complications that's associated with poor diabetes control. So everybody that I meet, I could meet 10 people today, all with coming to me with the same maybe complaint, but I might give them all very different advice, because I start with where the person is, and then with what they can do, we move forward to improve the diet to meet their individual needs.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Like, I suppose if somebody's looking at a plate, and if we can kind of use this as like a rough kind of case study, somebody that maybe a woman in their 40s wants to get a wee bit leaner, improve their energy, have good health, just look after their well-being. If you were looking at kind of just say a plate, for example, what would kind of be the breakdown of that plate? And I know you kind of alluded to it there with the protein, the fats, the carbohydrates, and the water, but is there any kind of specific measurements you would be looking for, or would it just be incorporating everything in kind of a balanced portion size?
It's really making sure you eat to your appetite but not overeat. What a lot of us do is whenever we're trying to watch our weight, we restrict our diets, but we restrict our diets so much that we actually neglect to give it what it needs. And then we start having these cravings, and then you naturally then in between our meals we'll crave a higher fat, higher sugary foods, or a lot of snacks tend to be that sort of consistency anyway. So what I would always say is make sure you have your good breakfast, you're on a substantial lunch, and then a substantial dinner, but not too much, and it's spreading what you need throughout the day. So the first thing would be is always make sure you have some sort of energy source, but not too much. So whenever I chat to clients, I'll always ask, what's the first thing you put in your plate? And most often will say their potatoes or their pasta.
Yeah.
Well, what I would say is put your vegetables on first, because normally you put on the meat and the potatoes and there's this wee tiny triangle shape left for the vegetables. So we'd always say half of a plate should be vegetables or salad or the equivalent, and then a quarter of the plate your protein. So another thing that I would use, I would always get people to look at the size of their hand, and we would use the handy hints. So, and that kind of suits even for children, because if I had a penny for every time somebody said to me, what's the portion size for a child? I'd be a very rich lady. So it's really, you look at your hand, and the portion size of meat is roughly the size of your palm. So if you were to cut off the fingers, so that would be your protein. And then again, the equivalent would be off your potatoes. Now, in Ireland here, we love our spuds, so that can be a bone of contention sometimes. But if you work on that, or even as some people, if you're asking somebody who's normally eating 6 potatoes to go down to 1, they're going to feel really hungry. So I'd say go down to 4, get familiar with that, and then go down to 3 and get to where you need to. But if you try to do it too drastically, you'll actually get too hungry and you'll end up overeating on snacky foods later. So half the plate vegetables, quarter meat or protein, and then the other quarter would be your, what we would call our carbohydrate foods, whether that be rice, pasta, potatoes, or bread for that matter.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, and that kind of analogy that would be similar in terms of how we would view exercise. If somebody is doing nothing and they come in to train with us, the worst thing that they could do would be put through 6 really tough sessions in the first week, because they wouldn't be able to come back and train. Their body couldn't handle it. And like what you said about, if you tell somebody, okay, you're eating 6 potatoes, go down to 1, that's too much too soon, and the body won't be able to kind of handle that transition. Is that what you mean with that, Vanessa?
Yeah, you might be able to sustain that for 1 or 2 days, but you're not going to sustain that for a long time. And most people, when we want to lose the weight or manage your weight, we want it to be for the long term.
Yep.
So it's making sure, and to be honest, we always want the results yesterday. But a lot of the time when we're making these changes, we're changing habits. So they're a lifelong habit that your body has adjusted to. And realistically, if you think about it, it's so easy to put weight on and so difficult to lose it. So your body is naturally designed to hold on to energy. It doesn't want to let it go. So if you try to do it too drastically, it's going to fight you. It's going to make you feel tired. It's going to make you feel hungry. And it is going to be so much more difficult to make the right decisions, when it comes to food. So yeah, always start off with what you can do, get it established, and then make a few more changes.
Yeah, I love what you said about the portion control method as well. I've done a lot of kind of work on nutrition myself, and tried various things throughout the years, and had plans throughout the years, tried various things. And to me, the portion size one fits a lot of people's lifestyles better. For us, the people that we work with, the portion size seems to be the one that is really easy to implement and really easy to sustain. And I would have had the approach maybe a few years ago when I was a bit younger and didn't appreciate how actually busy people can be, that everything had to go through MyFitnessPal. And to me, whereas MyFitnessPal does have its advantages, it's not sustainable and it's not a long-term solution. I feel now for people to kind of live through a phone and to have everything being scanned and everything being kind of checked in, whereas the portion control makes so much more sense. It seems a lot easier method to implement, something that's a lot easier to sustain, and something that people can enjoy and make progress with as well. Do you have any kind of thoughts on MyFitnessPal and people that have used that before, Vanessa?
We would use, there's a few different apps that we would use within dietetics. MyFitnessPal would be one of them. Carbs and Cals would be a very common one in the world of diabetes. The only thing that I have, I think initially, yes, it's good possibly to track your food just to give you an awareness of where you're getting your energy from. But another thing that we would commonly use was just getting people to write down what they eat. Like even today, I was chatting to a lady, and it wasn't until when we got to about lunchtime, she goes, "Oh, I didn't realize I actually ate as much." You know, so once it's just that awareness. It's everything that nearly goes through the lips has to be accounted for. So sometimes it's just using it as an awareness to see where are the areas of weakness and how can I adapt to it. But what I don't want people doing, and this is where it can become a wee bit of an issue, and maybe eating disorders and different disordered patterns of eating can occur, is if we get too homed in on calories and too homed in on this and that we actually start to stress about food. And stress in itself isn't good for the body. We all know the disadvantages of stress. So if food now then becomes a stress, it just causes a whole catalogue of problems. So I would prefer people to sit down and say, what would I enjoy? When normally it comes to the diet, it's like, oh, what will I eat today? And there's this automatic negative emotion attached to the food and to the meals, and it just nearly puts you off eating properly. Whereas I say to somebody, what would you really enjoy? And then I start to get them to think, right, what could you add to that? So it's never I can't have this or I should be having this. And as soon as you start to say, what would I enjoy, the happy feelings automatically start. So it's initially, yes, it's good for an awareness, but I wouldn't be wanting people to do it long term, just because we don't want that stress of eating and stress of calorie counting or protein counting getting in the way of actually enjoying life. And if somebody, now at the minute it's different because we're all grounded really, but prior to lockdown, if somebody just had to say, do you want to come for a cup of coffee or do you want to go out for a meal? A lot of people when they're trying to diet, oh no, it's another thing I have to deal with. Whereas it's trying to teach them how to embrace that, but still manage to keep on track and what to do the day before and the day after. So I suppose it's a wee bit more mindfulness. All food is okay, but be mindful, what have I already eaten this morning? And what potentially am I going to eat later on today or tomorrow that might impact my choice right now? So you're never saying, no, you can't have that, but it might be, well, maybe today's just not the best day. I'll not enjoy it because I know the last time I overate, I felt guilty. So I would do a lot of reflection with people to learn from their own experience, find out their triggers, and then try and avoid those triggers for the future. So so there's so much around it. There's a lot of psychology around it, to be fair.
Yeah, completely. And I've definitely built a really big appreciation for the psychology that is involved with nutrition. And I just read something down there that when you were chatting through that hopefully kind of brings it together. I suppose improving people's relationship with food is a massive thing that you probably look at as well, is trying to improve people's view on food and how they kind of live with it and what they view it as.
Yeah, within my role within the Southern Trust, it naturally within diabetes, especially in the world of type 2 diabetes, there would be a lot of people who maybe would struggle with being overweight. So I run a special weight management clinic now, not just for people with obesity, but you can only get really referred to me if you have a BMI greater than 40. And a lot of that is really going through the emotional. So most people who come to that usually have some form of emotional eating. So a lot of the time, I'm not really actually talking food. Food, yes, is mentioned because obviously that's what they're there, but it's the relationship, it's their perception, it's the guilt, and it's just really, I suppose it's trying to wipe the slate clean from an awful lot of misinterpretation, a lot of diets that have been, advertised to us over the years. And if you start one diet, you maybe never really drop it. You'll always cherry pick wee bits out of each diet that almost suit ourselves. But whenever you combine them together, they just don't work because each diet is designed to work in its own specific way. So whenever you start to cherry pick bits and pieces from different diets, that's when you'll struggle. It has to be that particular diet's principles, and that's it, if that makes sense. So a lot of it is just breaking down an awful lot of wrong information and then getting them built back up into just a natural process of just eating and enjoying their food.
Yeah, completely. That makes a lot of sense. I suppose that'll actually tie in quite well with what we're going to move on to now. And I think from the general public point of view, from me having conversations with people in the past and understanding a bit more, emotional eating tends to be quite a big thing that people struggle with, and depending on how they're feeling, their nutrition will be a representation of that. In terms of emotional eating, what would you kind of define emotional eating as, and how would you look to improve that with somebody? If somebody is feeling stressed and they'll go to the biscuit and or they'll maybe open a bottle of wine or whatever it is, if they're feeling stressed and that triggers them to emotionally eat, what do you define it as, and how do you look to improve that with people?
We actually have a questionnaire which has been designed to identify emotional eating and actually which emotion triggers what response. So it could be boredom, it could be fear, it could be anxiety, it could be stress. There's so many. Even the emotion of rewarding ourselves with food. So there's there's so many emotions. So it's trying to figure out which one's which. So what I always get, there's a few wee tools that we would have at work in terms of getting people to think about, let's just stop. A lot of the time we react without thinking. We've just taught ourselves, we feel bad, we eat. And I suppose in a way, we've been taught that from our parents, or even maybe they even still do it today with their kids. Because if you have a bad day, mom will give you a wee biscuit or a wee bar or a wee bag of crisps, and we naturally reward with food. So whenever we grow up into adults and something goes wrong, we will naturally reward ourselves with food. So what I get people to do is I get them to think back to the last time that they actually experienced an episode like that. And so the first thing we always need them to figure out what triggered it. So that's another issue. So it's trying to figure out the triggers. But we would get them to think back to the last time that they had an episode, and we chat through how they felt, and we write it all down. And it's usually the common theme is I felt guilty. And the way people talk to themselves, like you would never talk to anybody else the way we talk to ourselves. We are really abusive to ourselves. And it's really trying to break down and say, well, would you say that to your friend? Why are you not kind to yourself? So it's been kind to self. And then once we've figured that all out, I then say, well, what things do make you feel better? Because usually what we find out is the food actually makes you feel an awful lot worse. You have all these guilt feelings. Then you go really, really strong at the diet. You practically starve yourself at the next meal. And it becomes this constant, vicious, destructive cycle, which achieves nothing. If anything, we probably end up always eating more than we ever set out to eat. So I always then focus on saying, so if you've now realized and reflected and realized that whenever you eat that, it doesn't actually make you feel better, my next question would be, what things do make you feel better? Is it going and getting your nails done? Is it taking a hot bath? Is it ringing that friend who always makes you laugh? So everybody has their own differences. For a man, it could be going out working in the shed. And then if somebody says, well, look, I really need food. So then I have this wee technique, which I actually learned this from a psychiatrist, working alongside a psychiatrist during eating disorders, where if you are going to eat something to make you feel better, you actually have to let it make you feel better, because we always have to remember we're allowed food. Food is a necessity. And if you have had a really bad day or a really stressful day and you really are feeling horrible and you want to feel better about yourself, and you think that piece of chocolate or that cake or whatever, that glass of wine or whatever it is going to make you feel that way, then let it make you feel that way. So I would, the psychiatrist actually says you have to get all senses involved. So he would actually say you slow down. So again, the first question I would get them to ask themselves, rather than just going to the cupboard and eating and opening the fridge while eating some more. And a lot of people actually don't register what they eat. It's not until they see the packets afterwards that they can then tell me, well, this is what I actually ate. So it's slowing down and asking that very simple question, what would I really enjoy? So again, the positive emotions are already starting. What would I really enjoy? Slowing down, going and selecting that one particular item, making the cup of tea or whatever it is, sitting down. And that's where the psychiatrist says you have to smell it. He actually says you should squeeze it as well, but with food, I'm not too sure if that's a good thing or not. And he would say you would maybe lick it, and you would take a small bite and you actually process it and you say, yes, this is creamy, this is crunchy, this is salty, and tell yourself nearly why you like it. And by doing that, you're actually increasing happy hormones, you're actually bringing down the stress hormones, and you're actually allowing the food to comfort you. And as part of a healthy diet, because it is allowed, there's no guilt. So it's really teaching people about there is no guilt. Maybe yes later on, and then we'll talk about swaps. You might swap it with something else, but you're never denying yourself. And then it's slowly trying to, talk yourself out of that, and then maybe use other so food's never the first go-to that we try to teach people, maybe to go for that wee walk, or an exercise would be one of the best. Sometimes it's just getting out of the house, clearing the head. Doesn't have to be a hard fast walk. In fact, it's just getting out of the house, and some people would do that and then come in, and then they feel that they don't need to eat, or they've talked themselves out of it. It's just slowing down, that we're just not reacting all of the time.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Like, I suppose that nearly comes down to like reprogramming your reward system and the things that you kind of feel you can allow yourself to do that are going to help you improve your nutrition, improve your kind of fitness, health goals. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And emotional eating, I suppose, when you stop to kind of look at it and break it down for people, that sometimes it might even happen quite subconsciously without even the awareness around it, that, like you said, they're going to the biscuits and they're maybe eating them without even realizing. That's only when they kind of stop and slow down that they can really bring that awareness to what they're actually consuming. This is going to tie in pretty well as well. I suppose that the next kind of thing we could move on to is the impact of stress and poor sleep on nutrition. And from my kind of perspective, what I've seen and even experienced myself, poor sleep, limited sleep, not great sleep can really affect how I feel the following day, especially when it comes to kind of cravings and food that I want, and how I'm feeling, that I maybe want that quick sugar fix to give me a lift, and I'm just not functioning on the same level that I am. How big of an impact would you say that a poor night's sleep and maybe a lot of stress would have on people's nutritional decision making?
Sleep is a massive factor when it comes to mental health, and also digestion and how your body responds. No matter why we're stressed. So for example, we need stress hormones in the body. For example, if a car is coming towards me and I need to run out of the way, I need my stress hormones to kick in to allow me to for that run, or that you hear the whole fight or flight emotion. So we do need that. It's also very protective against heart disease, in terms of if there's a blockage or whatever in any of the arteries, our body can actually increase the stress hormones to actually, dilate the blood vessels to try and help. So we do need the stress hormones are really important for that. But if they're heightened all of the time, it really starts to cause a hormone imbalance throughout the whole of the body, and all forms of hormones. So insulin being a hormone, which is a big, massive impact then on how we respond with our appetite. And we start then to even lose the ability of knowing the difference between hunger and then that need to eat, because of this stress response. So it's, I suppose what it is, if there's chronic stress now and again is fine, it's the chronic stress. So, and if it's impacting on your sleep, so if we even just touch on sleep for a second or two, if you're tired and you're not giving your body what it needs, it is naturally going to crave high calorie foods, because it's needing that energy just to get through the day. And that then snowballs, and is whenever we naturally eat then more, because of those stress hormones, and we're naturally going for the higher sugar, higher fat, maybe higher caffeine foods, we are actually much less likely to choose the healthier foods. And it starts to build up over time, where our diet, we naturally go for these other foods, and if you think about caffeine is addictive. So then you start to rely on this aid, which only gives you a 15-20 minute boost. And then, so it just becomes a vicious circle. A lot of people, whenever I chat to them, and I always talk about diet quality, I say, before we even look at weight loss or anything, let's just improve the quality. Because once you start eating better, like I've been working now for just over 20 years as a dietitian, And of all the people that I see, if they don't include fruit and veg in the diet, they will struggle with weight loss or weight management. So diet quality is really important. So it's making sure that we build up there because stress hormones also affect your bowel. So, and if the bowel's not functioning properly, then that in turn affects our digestion. So it's a whole catalogue that it's just, if you can reduce the chronic stress, or if you can find a way to de-stress, even if it's, there's so much evidence to say to just break for 10 minutes, even just 5 minutes, and just settle the mind, there's enough. That's where you just need to get away from your desk and come back. But especially when you're working from home, I think stress levels have increased because we're not getting the same breakaway times. So I think it's a difficult one to answer in just a few moments, but it affects everybody differently. But we all know chronic stress is not good, and some people will eat more, other people might eat less, but eating less isn't good either. It's making sure that you give your body what it needs. So it's always figuring out, always go back to the source. What's causing the stress? And is there anything that you can do to minimize or alleviate the stress, so then you can cope with it better? Or even just have strategies in place where you don't have to think about food, where you do go to, you know, the local cafe or friend or meal provider to cook the meals, if it's cooking the, or having to get the meals made and or buy the ingredients. There's so many factors to it. So it's just trying to always have a solution to make things easier for you.
Yeah, completely appreciate it. That's such a broad kind of subject on nutrition and stress management and recovery with sleep. And it definitely makes a lot of sense that if we can kind of improve our sleep and prioritize that, it has such a bigger impact on how we feel each day and where our kind of body is. And what you said about it being in balance as well from a hormone point of view makes a lot of sense. And something that we'll move on to now, that I probably my biggest lesson in 2020 in terms of nutrition when I look back on it was Vanessa and myself. Vanessa had signed up for a precision nutrition coaching qualification, which really went into the kind of psychology on nutrition, and a lot of the stuff that you're saying is linked in with what they have said as well. And it's super fascinating. They focused on quite a large portion of the course on like mindful eating and how we eat. And it's not something that I actually would ever have thought. I would have looked at what was in front of me as opposed to how I was eating it. And even now I've put things in place that have really helped it. So for example, previously I might have been on my phone, responding to emails, responding to messages, but I was eating at the same time and I was paying no attention to how I was eating and just mindlessly eating more than what I maybe needed to, not eating the quality of foods that I needed to. And it's actually when I've slowed down, chewed my food more, spent a bit more time at the dinner table and being a bit more relaxed when I'm eating, it's had such a positive impact on how I feel with food and how it digests and how I actually don't need to eat more. I can eat less but still feel as satisfied and as fulfilled from eating less, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I suppose like how you eat, is it important? And kind of linking that to mindful eating, how do you kind of feel about that, Vanessa?
Yeah. Well, I suppose even going right back to childhood or children's eating, like there's so much evidence around the benefit of everybody all sitting around the table. You can't really quantify what it is, but there's all the evidence suggests that if you have a round table or sit at a table and eat together, it improves mental health. It decreases eating disorders. It decreases childhood anxiety. And so many other things. And then obviously, if we take that into adulthood, so many times whenever you eat really fast, people don't realize it takes 20 minutes for your brain to catch up with your stomach. So if you eat really fast, you can actually get so much more food in before then you start to feel full. Because as sometimes I say to people, you know that whole feeling, you get to the table and you're really hungry and you start eating and then the doorbell rings and you go to the door and by the time you come back, you're thinking, you're not a bit hungry. And it's because your brain has caught up with the tummy. So it's really quite funny, but there's been in the world of weight management, there's been so many inventions to try and help this. And one of the things that they actually invented to try and slow people down was actually a vibrating fork. So if you lift the fork up too soon, it starts to vibrate. And it's to try and teach people to eat more slowly. But sure, you've always got one that lies. So we had a man who used to just sit with 2 forks. So he used to put one down and lift the other one up. So it has to be up here. You have to want to do these changes. You have to want to make the change. But slowing down is really important. Not drinking too much. And there's a big myth where people would say drink loads before you eat a meal and you'll eat less. Well, you might, but you might not eat enough. And at the end of the day, we do need to make sure that we're hitting our protein, our carbs, and our vitamin, mineral, and our fiber intake. So I would say yes, we probably don't drink enough with our meals. But probably another handy thing would be every time you chew your food, whenever you take a bite, you really should chew it at least 7 times, have it swallowed before then taking another bite. And sometimes the whole mindfulness and the whole mindful process of eating even goes right back to being very appreciative of where the food has come from and the work that it's taken to get to the plate. So it's just really slowing down. And I suppose it's even like that process where I was saying about if you're going to eat food to enjoy, it's actually telling yourself why you like it. And just to keep eating. But it is important to eat a variety of food. Sometimes we do fall into a trap of just eating the same foods all of the time because we enjoy them. Whereas our body needs so many more than just those that we like. And that would be another thing that we'd have to work with people about in terms of increasing variety. But definitely sitting down, your posture is really important. You definitely don't sit in front of the television with your dinner on your knee. That's a very bad habit. A lot of us learn that as in students sometimes in terms of poor accommodation. But it is getting yourself sitting at a table, prepping yourself. Even sitting down and having the table set nice, there's so much psychology around it. It's actually making the whole process more pleasant. So it's just, but yeah, definitely slowing down, taking your time to chew, taking your time to swallow, and taking your time to drink throughout your meal, before, during, and after, just to make sure that we are able to digest the food properly, because our body actually needs additional fluid to be able to digest the food, to break it down into the nutrients that the body needs to build up and repair itself.
Yeah, that makes so much sense when you look at it collectively from such a bigger standpoint, that there is so much more than just what's actually on the plate, but how it's consumed, how we kind of drink water with it, how it's prepared, and just the kind of psychology that accompanies it all. And it's only when I kind of learned that stuff this year that it really made sense, that slowing down, chewing your food, putting your knife and fork down maybe every couple of bites, and letting your, like you said, your stomach catch up with your brain made so much sense. And like, to me, there's no, we kind of talked about this, there's no kind of like one solution that just kind of helps everybody. It's kind of looking at small parts and implementing them small parts over a period of time that then accompanies the bigger picture. And I know sometimes people will be like, when they join, can you write me out a diet plan? Can you do this? Can you do that? But there's so much more that accompanies that than just a sheet of paper. And I think the education that you've kind of brought to this today will really help people be aware of them. One more question, Vanessa, before we can move on to the Q&A from some of the members, but somebody or just that I thought would tie in well as well. Like, how would you advise someone who experiences a lot of guilt around eating certain foods? How would you advise them to kind of improve that? So if somebody is eating something and they feel super guilty after, what do you kind of do to counteract that?
I want them to find out why they. So it's really digging deep. It's a lot of reflection. For a lot of people, I get them to actually journal their emotions along with the food that they eat, to find out. Sometimes it goes beyond my psychology, and then I have to refer them on for proper counselling. But I've maybe been the first person that's actually got them to actually think about it, and then it's not until they've started to think about it that they realize it's come from maybe a traumatic experience when they were younger, and they've never realized that it's actually had a deep impact. But then that's way beyond me, and I don't ever dream to think that I could handle something like that. So I then can refer on. my first question is always, why do they feel guilty? Like, what is it that's making them feel guilty about that particular food? And then I suppose if it is a misconception, is it fat or is it this? It's so individual. And then once you figure out what it is and then do the education around them, as in to say it is to do with fat, then I can then go through a whole education with them about why we need fat, the benefits of it, hair, skin, nails, all of that. Even for the heart, we need a certain amount of fat. Everybody, even for hormones, we need a certain amount of fat. So it's going through the why and then try to bring them out of that. And then, so it really starts with why they're feeling guilty, what is the emotion, and then just trying to educate them to let them realize that they shouldn't feel guilty. And then they just don't come out of it straight away. It could be over a period of time. It may always just linger in the background, but at least if they are aware of it and have embraced it and have techniques, they can move beyond it. But no, it's a very big thing at the minute. But I think it's the whole, every time you go onto Facebook or you go onto television, there's somebody advertising some new weight loss program or pill or supplement or something. And then people buy into this and try, and then they fail, but they think they have failed. They have never failed. You can't fail when something never was going to work in the first place. But the advertisement, like this put a lot of money into advertising these things. So it's very, very, very convincing. But then it's just dealing with all these beliefs that particular person has failed when they never have. They were just given the wrong advice to begin with. But it's just breaking that all down and just getting the person comfortable with normal foods again, and then just eating a normal diet.
Yeah, totally. And I know we kind of spoke about this and the things that are marketed on Facebook, on Google, on TV, and even the likes of some of your Weight Watchers and Slimming World places that promote that kind of fast fix. And if you haven't lost weight, you failed, and you need to go back and do it again and do it harder. And it kind of turns into that vicious yo-yo cycle where it's up and down and really gives people a negative relationship with potentially nutrition and exercise and general health and well-being, and it's a bit of a yo-yo experience for them. And we had a challenge that we had launched in November. We called it Metabolic Makeover, but one of the things that I was kind of super aware of when we were doing this was actually not telling people you can't have this, but telling the members that we want to eat more of two food groups. Because from my experience, people tend to, like you said at the start, when they're looking at the plate, the potatoes go on first. So people will, maybe not intentionally, but overeat in areas like carbohydrates and fats, just maybe without even realizing. And I was like, we want you to eat more protein and more micronutrients. That's what we want to go on your plate first. If you have the portion sizes controlled here, the rest of the plate can make up that. And people were finding like the less room to add in the carbohydrates and the fats, just like you said, and it completely seemed to change it for a lot of people, because they were like, okay, this isn't restrictive. I can eat what I want, but as long as I'm getting this nutrition in me. And some people got really, really good results in terms of that 30 days. Some people felt a lot leaner. Some people lost some centimeters and inches and weight and stuff. But the big thing for me was like just improving their relationship with food and incorporating a better all-round plate. Would you say there's a big kind of factor in telling people to eat more of a certain food group as opposed to kind of restricting them in a certain area?
I suppose the first thing I would say is to somebody is never to completely cut a huge chunk of a particular type of food out of the diet. I know there's so many diets out there, and it has to be sustainable. And if you think about, especially the way we live now, there's so many celebrations and parties, and it's very difficult to sustain a particular type of diet. And whenever you take out one huge chunk of a macronutrient, so I suppose carbohydrates is the big one now, like the carbohydrate-free diet. Carbohydrate still is the main energy form for the human body. So we do need some, but yes, we do eat too much of it. So I think what it is, it's just looking at what your body needs. Everybody's requirements vary slightly. Okay, so whenever somebody comes in, we have unique equations for people to work out how many grams of protein, carbohydrate, fat that they need depending on their age, their gender, their sport, medical condition. There's so many other factors that play a part. But I think what it is not overeating on anything, because anything that we overeat on, no matter how good it is, our body can convert it to fat. So at work, I would use this analogy of a cup. So if my cup only holds 300 mils, but if I try to put 500 mils into the 300 mil cup, what happens? And naturally we'll all say, well, it'll spill over. So if my body only needs 1,500 calories to survive, and it doesn't matter how I give my body those 1,500 calories, if I overeat, so if I eat at 2,000 calories, my body will naturally convert that extra 500 calories and lay it down as fat. Okay, so it's getting the balance right, but then it's getting all those nutrients right. So I kind of alluded to it earlier on in terms of if you don't give your body the vitamins and minerals that it requires, it'll struggle. So you have to make sure you get the balance. You have to make sure you have the protein, the carbs, and the vegetables. And I would say, because we are a natural snacky nation, we're always going to make up our carbs usually, but the protein we might not. So it's making sure that we have protein spread throughout the day. Our body doesn't like all the protein that it needs in just one big source. It has to be spread throughout the day. And even with athletes, it's trying to educate them as well that, oh, if I need 100 grams of protein, can I just not drink it in 2 drinks and that's it done? Doesn't work that way. It has to be timed around the exercise. The particular type of exercise will depend on their carbohydrate to protein ratio. There's so many other variables depending on what we're wanting to achieve, but female nutrition would be that wee bit more different from male nutrition advice, and it's just making sure that girls aren't trying to follow a man's plan, if that makes sense. It has to be individual and do what works best for us, but we do need fat in the diet. A lot of people cut it out too much. A lot of research is showing that if you cut too much fat out of the diet, we'll naturally eat more carbohydrate, and that in itself isn't good. So we need fat, we need carbohydrate, we just don't need too much of anything. So it's just, I suppose that's a bit of a woolly answer, but it is very individual to the unit, or to the unique to that individual.
Yeah, no, completely makes sense. And I think we can kind of maybe use this last kind of 15 or 20 minutes to maybe go through some of the questions that were posted in the form. One of the questions that somebody asked, Vanessa, was, what are the effects of salt on exercise and general health?
Okay, well, salt's a big thing. To be honest, we all need salt in the diet, but we don't need to add it because there's so much salt already added to lots of foods that we're eating. We really do not need to add any at the table. Now, I suppose if you've got high blood pressure at all or any kidney problems, you do not add salt to your diet. In fact, I go even beyond that and say you have to really start to look at a low salt diet. So looking at the other foods that you would naturally eat and try and choose lower salt alternatives. So we really don't need to add any extra salt to the diet. But when it comes to exercise, the more we exercise, the more we sweat. And some people will sweat salt more than others. We'll all sweat a certain amount of salt. So if you're exercising for a very long period of time and you're drinking lots of fluid, you will naturally sweat out salt. And if you don't replace that salt, it can start to cause problems. So salt would be a big issue with the likes of Ironmen or triathletes because of the duration of the exercise that they're doing. And if they don't get enough salt or replace that salt, they're going to have issues with cramping whenever they're running. That would be one of the biggest things. And it's usually due to dehydration and not replacing that salt. So you don't necessarily, for the routine Joe Blog who's just doing a wee bit of exercise on a weekly basis, we're going to get enough salt in the diet that we're already eating. If you are exercising for say 90 minutes or longer, you might then just use a sports drink, whether that be Lucozade Sport, Gatorade, or Powerade, one of those other ones, because they're naturally designed to replace that salt. But it's not unless you're a long endurance athlete, it's usually not an issue. Just avoid it.
Yeah, Yeah, that was my kind of feeling on it as well, and I know it was kind of a general enough question to kind of answer. So I completely understand that. Polycystic ovaries. Do you or have you worked with anybody that has had that in the past, and how you kind of work with somebody with that?
Yeah, I see quite a few with polycystic ovaries. So it's really working on certain medications. Exercise is a big thing as well. It's making sure they get all the correct, they need their bloods done. We need to look at their thyroid, we need to look at their hormone levels, and they have to be corrected. So there's a lot of medical input for that one as well then as diet. Um, it's kind of like a chicken and egg scenario. Which one causes which? Does being overweight cause polycystic ovaries, or does polycystic ovaries cause the weight gain? And it's a chicken and egg situation. It's kind of individual for each person, but I would work with them, but a lot of the time it is trying to increase their exercise needs to be more like a marathon. It has to be low intensity for longer if they want to achieve weight loss. We do need to build in every week. They need at least 2 sessions of strength building as well, but they have to really work on the longer, lower intensity to help them fat burn a wee bit more. It's just a wee bit easier on the system for them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's fantastic. And the next question was, somebody had said about fasting. I don't eat for 6+ hours at a time due to work, so I don't really know what the kind of the statement or the question means, but I presume it's something to do with, is this wrong or is this right type of thing. Should I be eating less than, should I be eating more frequently than every 6 hours? And what's your kind of thoughts on that, Vanessa?
Well, I suppose it depends where they're working and if they're not able to get breaks. Like I know for a fact since the whole COVID, a lot of my colleagues who are now working longer hours in full PPE where they're not allowed even like fluid breaks, you naturally just have to adapt to that. It really depends on whether that's your choice that you work for 6 hours or whether it's the nature of the job which you physically can't get away from. What I would say in that particular case would be to sustain you for 6 hours, you really then should have a pretty substantial breakfast. But it would be, and making sure there's protein in there and low, slow release carbohydrates that is going to break down slower and give you the energy. But it would be the fluid. Trying to work for 6 hours without drinking adequate fluid, I think you'd struggle. By the end of the 6 hours, I'd say the mind is just not going to be as alert. So it'd be more fluid and then replacing it afterwards. You could probably go for 2 larger meals that day, but it's a very individual. It's more the type of work and why it's the 6 hours. But you can work around it. It's just getting your own pattern, I suppose.
And yeah, I suppose the next thing is actually a big point that we probably could have spent a bit of time speaking on, but somebody had mentioned it, and that avoiding weekend self-sabotage. And
Yeah.
from my experience, Monday to Friday routine is there. People know what they're doing. They know kind of a day ahead what's happening the next day. But come Saturday and Sunday, the wheels sometimes can come off from people. And from my experience, I've always felt getting some form of movement or exercise first thing on a Saturday or Sunday morning just helps get us feeling better, improves that kind of energy, allows us to burn some calories as well, as opposed to maybe laying in the 9 or 10 o'clock and then just kind of going through the cupboards nearly out of boredom. As such, what is your kind of thoughts on weekend self-sabotage and how you kind of work with people to maybe stop that and move on from it?
I think it goes right back to the whole emotional eating conversation that we had earlier on. It's just a different type of emotional eating. Yeah. It's all about rewarding. You've had a hard week, it comes the weekend, and you reward yourselves. Yeah. For example, some people might even think, well, it's the weekend, I'm just going to sit up late, even though they're so tired. But it's the weekend, so I'm going to sit up late instead of just going to bed and listening to the body and getting up the next morning and Tuesday and doing a wee bit of activity. So I think it's going right back to, why do you feel the need to eat like that? Is there anything that you can do? And I agree with you, exercise doesn't have to be hard or fast. As soon as I mention exercise to somebody, the first thing they say to me, well, I can't run. And I kind of going, just move, move. Yeah, whatever you can do, just move. So cleaning windows, washing the car, mowing the lawn, whatever. But I think it's going right back to that whole emotional thing about, yes, you have been stressed, you've had a rough week, you deserve to be treated, but just that word treat, is it a treat if it makes you feel worse and makes you feel, guilty and all those horrible kind of feelings? So it's going right back to the emotional side of things. And I suppose it's looking at what do you treat yourself with, and a term that I use all the time is damage limitation. So if it's like 6 bottles of beer and a full takeaway and a bag of crisps, could we cut it down? Could it be 3 bottles of beer? Could it be you share the takeaway with somebody? So you just, it's damage limitation. It's cutting it down rather than cutting it out, because if you start to cut it out, the whole thing is, oh, you're being deprived. Again, it's another set of different types of emotions. So it's just maybe trying to think about it a wee bit more and then just adapt it, so it's just not as bad as maybe what it could be. But yes, get some exercise in there. You'll always feel better when you do a wee bit of exercise.
Yeah, I think the exercise is, for me, what I've seen with people just getting up, getting moving, get so much good energy around the body, and it kind of, I think, subconsciously reminds them of, okay, I want to stay healthy, I want to stay, I don't know if on track's the right phrase, but I want to keep progressing and looking after myself on a Saturday and Sunday as well as I do on a Monday to a Friday. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. The next thing that somebody asked was, why do I need a sweet fix after training?
After eating, to be honest, I think that's habit. To be honest, sometimes I blame the school. Like, I don't know who ever decided that whenever you have a dinner, you have to have a sweet after it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, at school meals, you always have your wee pudding afterwards. And my kids will always say to me, "Where's my pudding?" I'm going, "You don't need a pudding." "No, but we do. You have to have a pudding every day." So again, it's just retraining the brain. But I try not to say, it's not that I do say no to my kids, but I try to say, now's not the right time. I'll say, look, you're going to want something later on anyway. Why don't you just hold off and enjoy that a wee bit better later? So really, it's really retraining the brain to tell yourself that you don't need it. But some people, it's a difficult one, especially at nighttime. For most, especially I think for most of us, nighttime is possibly the worst. But it's a bit like the weekend thing. Get the kids to bed, you've done all the dishes, and you're sitting down, and it's just like that.
Yeah.
And we treat ourselves, and we've just historically always treated ourselves with food. So when we grow up to adults, we just treat ourselves with food. So it's just trying to retrain the brain that that's not necessarily a treat. Can we treat with something else? And I suppose even going to that, if we do have kids, is trying to encourage your children or treat them with other things other than food. Like the one thing that we're trying to get a lot of parents to do, any parents I chat to, is this whole thing, but you're not allowed, you're not going to get this until you finish what's on your plate.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that's not teaching. We're trying to teach people to know when they're full, know when they're satisfied, so they're not always just having to eat what's on their plate. Because if we carry that into adulthood, that actually can increase or the risk of us putting on too much weight. So within reason, like for example, if you only take 2 bites and that's it, well, no, it has to be a substantial amount, but it's making sure that they properly feel full and that it's not a treat because they're allowed it because they're allowed it. I think we have to be careful about how we reward our children. I think it should be more things like they choose the meal tomorrow night. Now they might just always choose chips and gravy or whatever, but you give them a choice of 2 meals and they get to choose which, and you ultimately always have the control. You choose the 2 meals and they pick which one they want, so they've still chosen the meal, or an extra 20 minutes at the park, or a magazine, or they choose the game night for the family night. So it's trying to think of different rewards, which is more mentally and emotionally more positive than food. The types of foods that we reward with. So again, that's more of an emotional one, to be fair.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. And even I think back with my own childhood, and I suppose people don't know this is just educating, I suppose, parents to maybe understand this a bit better, but don't leave the dinner table until your plate's clear and that type of language and stuff like that. And yeah, it definitely makes sense when you look back on it now. There's another question here, Vanessa. I made a time for one more, where somebody has said how to make sense of macros and our vitamins and supplements a gimmick. So there's kind of two questions there put into one, but how to make sense of macros. I know that's quite a broad
Yeah.
question, and I suppose there's maybe only so much we can kind of answer that with the time that's given, but in terms of answering that.
Well, I suppose I'll touch on the supplements. To be honest, there has been so much research done in the world of supplements. And to be honest, unless you have a particular deficiency, supplements aren't really of any benefit. Now, people would take them and say they feel better, but that could be anecdotal. It's like, you know, when they do like trials, they'll give somebody the tablet and they'll give somebody a Smartie, and nobody really knows the difference. And the amount of people who still think they've benefited because they believe they've had the medication when they haven't. So there's a lot of placebo effect. So vitamins, unless you have a deficiency, there's no real benefit. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that if you take too much of vitamins, because vitamins and minerals we need in such small amount, that if we overload the system with any one particular vitamin, it actually can cause more harm. And I'm going to give you an example of one in particular. Beta carotene is very protective against the heart. So a lot of people started taking beta carotene supplements. So they did a big trial on it and actually had to stop the trial because the beta carotene in high volumes actually cause more heart problems. So we get, as long as you get a good varied diet, so it's making sure you get your different type. We always talk about a rainbow color of vegetables and fruit in the diet, a good variety, not the same chicken or fish or meat. It's getting a good variety all the time, making sure you're drinking plenty of fluid, then you'll be fine. The only vitamins really that I suppose are a necessity is, and this is probably a message that has been lost over the decades, but any female of childbearing age should be on folic acid without doubt. Okay, and that's just in case they ever fall pregnant, because it's so essential for the brain and the nerve cord, the spinal cord development. So every female should be on folic acid every single day. The other one would be vitamin D. During the months between September and May, we do not get enough sunlight. And in Northern Ireland, you might even argue we don't even get enough even during the summer months. So people then should take vitamin D. Again, childbearing age girls should probably take vitamin D and folate routinely, just for that reason. But definitely during the winter months, we should supplement with vitamin D. And then during the summer, you might come off it if you're out in the sun enough. And then children between the ages of 6 months to about 5 or 6, they actually should be supplemented with vitamin A, C, and D. And so much so that you can actually, some people who are on benefits can actually get them free. So children from that age should actually be on those wee multivitamins if you can get the kids to take them. But other than that, unless you have a deficiency, there's no benefit, and no supplement is ever going to replace the benefits of the vegetables. Even, for example, your fish oils, they did a massive study as well comparing omega-3 capsules in comparison to eating the fish with the same amount of omega-3, and the people who ate the fish had way more benefits. They'll not do any harm. That's one thing omega-3 not do any harm, but if you're wanting the benefits, if you can, you eat the fish. So it is a huge commercial thing. There's a lot of money to be made. Maybe certain times a year, if the diet just isn't good, maybe for some people their access to food, and shopping and stuff. There's some people, some medical conditions, obviously we'll start them on supplements, but that's due to so many other problems. And they do have deficiencies, but routinely you don't need them. Maybe now and again a wee bit, if you've got the cold, you might take a wee dose of vitamin C and zinc just to get you over it, but long term you don't need it. Your money could be better spent in other things, really.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing that. There we go, that's where we're at now, Vanessa. Love it. Yeah, I remember seeing in America that the supplement and vitamin industry was valued at over 1 trillion. That was maybe 10 years ago. I remember watching a video on that, a documentary on it, so I can only imagine what it's valued at now. And like you said, the kind of quick fix, the silver bullet that everybody is kind of, some people maybe are looking for, and that's marketed to us quite consistently. So yeah, that all makes perfect sense. Vanessa, just before we finish, I was going to ask if anybody that's tuned in and took the time to kind of come on live, does anybody have any questions before we finish it up? If anybody wants to ask anything, don't be afraid to kind of share it away, because we do appreciate everybody coming on live and kind of being here for the chat. So if there's anything that anybody wants to ask, share it away, folks. And if there's not, no problem.
Stunned to silence.
Yeah, not often you get Paul McGilligan not speaking, or Kathy McBride, so we're maybe in a good one, so we are. But yeah, hopefully there's to me, having that conversation with you, Vanessa, has been fantastic. There's so much value in it, and I'm so glad we took the time to do it. I'm so glad that you offered your time and your expertise here, because this stuff is fantastic, and I think the more people can kind of engage in this information and take it on board, the better they're going to feel with their nutrition, the better their health, their energy, their well-being, their body composition is going to be. So thank you so much for taking the time and coming on. We really appreciate it, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. To excuse the pun, it's my bread and butter. Do it every day, so yeah, I don't mind. I would much prefer if somebody has a question, rather than believe in maybe something that's hitting the news. I would always prefer that if somebody asks, or somebody ever has a question for you and they don't want to ask me personally, never to be afraid to say to you, and then you can say to me. I would prefer the right information to get out there, for their individual needs, if that makes sense.
Completely, Vanessa. If anybody does want to get in contact with you, maybe speak to you about any of the services that you offer, what's the best way? Is there an email address we can get you on, or a phone number, or what works best?
Yeah, well, if they want to book an appointment, I book and work through Back on Track there at the Linen Green. So because they always have they've got the online booking system, and then they've got somebody who would man the desk as well. So I would work with them. Or you can go on to me at I'm Victory Nutrition. So you can, and on Facebook, you can look me up as Victory Nutrition, and you can contact me that way. My telephone number and all is linked to that particular profile. So any questions?
That's perfect. Yeah, we'll get this recording sent out to all of the members as well, and anybody that wants to make use of watching it and getting in contact with you, that they know how to do it. So thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it, and thank you JSF members that came on as well. Thank you for giving up an hour of your time. We all appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Really enjoyed that. Thank you very much, Vanessa.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Kathy. Thanks, Paula. That's the recording.